All right, you ready to dive into something fun? We're going to tackle a pop culture phenomenon today, The Simpsons, and their uncanny ability to, like, predict the future.
More than just a few coincidences, though, right?
Yeah.
It really makes you think about how we see patterns, especially now with the internet, where like every little thing blows up.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And that's what we're here to figure out today. We've got articles, videos, even some like forum discussions all about these so-called Simpsons predictions. So is it really premonition or
Well,
clever writing or just a whole lot of hype? Guess we'll find out.
the number of these predictions is pretty wild when you put them all together. We're talking everything from Trump being president to the Disney-Fox merger, even Lady Gaga at the Super Bowl.
I gotta admit, even for someone who's skeptical, some of these do make me think. Like that episode where Lisa's president and mentions inheriting a budget crunch from President Trump. That image is just wild.
It's those little details that really stick with you, don't they?
Hmm.
Another one is the one where Homer's writing equations on a chalkboard, which some say predicted the mass of the Higgs boson particle.
Hold on, before we get too deep into this, can we break down this Higgs boson thing? I mean, I know it's a big deal in physics, but how does a cartoon even get into that?
That's where it gets interesting. The writer for that episode actually knew about physics,
Yeah.
and he talked to scientists to make that equation. So it wasn't like a prediction on purpose, but it was a pretty good guess based on real science.
So not a time traveler, but a smart writer who knows science. Okay, still, that level of detail makes you wonder about the others. Like, what about that episode with the horse meat scandal? Just a lucky guess or something more?
Remember, that episode was from way back in '94, but people were already worried about food contamination. Remember the mad cow disease thing in Europe? Everyone was freaking out about what they were eating.
So you're saying the Simpsons were just tapping into what people were already worried about, not like actually seeing the future. That makes sense, but isn't it still kind of strange how those worries ended up on the show in such specific ways?
It's a good point. It's almost as if The Simpsons was like a mirror, showing those anxieties in a way that people connected with. And with the internet, those connections get even stronger as people dig through old episodes looking for these patterns.
Talking about patterns, let's talk about that NSA spying thing from the Simpsons movie. Weren't people already kind of suspicious of the government back then?
Totally. The Snowden leaks hadn't happened yet, but there was definitely a growing distrust of the government and what they were up to. So, again, The Simpsons were picking up on something that was already there.
Okay, so maybe not Nostradamus,
Yeah.
but a show that's good at social commentary. But what about Trump? That one still feels surreal, even knowing he was around before.
Here's the thing about The Simpsons and Trump. They've been making fun of him forever, like way back in the '90s when he first talked about politics. The prediction of him being president was kind of like a running joke, a commentary on his ambition and what could happen if he was in charge.
So it's almost like they were saying, hey, this guy is so out there. Wouldn't it be crazy if he actually became president? And then, bam, it happened.
Exactly. It shows how satire can become reality. And it's not just The Simpsons. Other shows and comedians did the same thing.
Okay, so the Trump thing might be more about good satire than seeing the future. But what about Lady Gaga? Surely that can't be explained away so easily, right? I mean, the similarities between her being on the show and her Super Bowl performance are crazy.
Get ready for this one, because this is where things get really meta. Remember how Lady Gaga was the voice for that character in the 2012 episode? Well, it turns out she had a lot to say in how she was portrayed. She specifically wanted the flying harness and the crazy costume, just like she had at the Super Bowl years later.
Wait, are you serious? So she basically made her own Super Bowl performance happen through The Simpsons? That's almost weirder than an actual prediction. Is this life imitating art or art imitating life? I'm so confused.
It's a great example of how pop culture can make its own prophecies come true. And it shows how The Simpsons, being such a big part of our culture, can actually shape our reality in ways we don't expect.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. But even after talking about all this, some of it still feels a little spooky, like the level of detail in some cases is hard to ignore.
And that's the cool part, isn't it? While we can explain a lot of these predictions with context, satire, and coincidence, there's still some questions that make us wonder if there's something more going on.
It's like that saying, the truth is out there. But how do we sift through all the noise and find the real truth? We've only just started, haven't we?
We've made a start, but there's still so much more to explore. We've got a whole bunch of predictions to unpack, each with its own twists and turns.
Okay, so buckle up, everyone. We're going deeper down the rabbit hole. We'll dig into more predictions, look at the arguments against them, and maybe even find some surprises along the way.
Now the fun really begins. Let's see what other secrets The Simpsons is hidden in plain sight.
All right, let's jump back in. We've talked about the big predictions, but there are so many more, each with its own little twist. I bet some of you are thinking about one episode in particular.
You're talking about the one that seems to foreshadow the Disney-Fox merger, right? That one with Homer pitching a movie script and the studio's part of Disney. Yeah, that one definitely got people talking.
That's the one. And remember, this episode was from 1998, way before the actual merger in 2017. It's easy to think the writers had a crystal ball, but is there a simpler explanation?
There always is. Remember back in '96 when Disney bought ABC, another big media company? That was huge news, and people were worried about Disney getting too powerful.
So it wasn't a prediction, but more like a joke about something that was already happening?
Exactly. The Simpsons were making fun of Disney's power, and it just so happened that their joke came true years later, though not exactly how they showed it.
It shows they were smart and could see what was going on in culture, even if those jokes sometimes became reality.
It also shows something we see a lot with The Simpsons. They capture how people are feeling, like an anxiety that's just below the surface. Sometimes those anxieties become real, and suddenly the show seems like it knew what was going to happen.
Which makes you wonder, are they shaping our reality or just showing it? Or maybe both. It's a real chicken and egg situation.
That brings up another interesting question. Why are we so obsessed with these Simpsons predictions? Why do our brains love to connect the dots, even if it's more about coincidence than actually knowing the future?
I think about that too. Maybe it's the thrill of the unknown, the idea that maybe, just maybe, there are things happening that we don't understand, like finding a secret message, a glimpse into something we can't explain.
It also shows how much we want things to make sense, to have order in a world that often feels crazy and unpredictable. Finding patterns, even if they're not real, makes us feel like we have some control, like we can guess what's coming next.
Like we're all looking for a map, a way to figure out this crazy thing called life. And sometimes those maps show up in the weirdest places, like a cartoon we've been watching for years.
That's what's great about The Simpsons. It's a show that works on different levels, making us laugh and think, all wrapped up in silly jokes.
It's like sneaking in serious stuff while making you laugh.
Which brings us back to the big question of this deep dive. Are The Simpsons really predicting the future, or are they just really good at satire and social commentary showing us what was going on at the time? Or is it something more complicated, a mix of intention, coincidence, and our own tendency to see patterns even when they're not there?
This deep dive is really making me think. It's making me question everything I thought I knew about The Simpsons and maybe even about reality itself.
That's what critical thinking is all about, right? It makes us question what we think we know and look at things in a new way.
So where do we go from here? Have we figured it all out? Or is this just the beginning of a much bigger conversation?
There's still stuff to explore, predictions we haven't talked about yet. And I think we need to talk about whether it's even right to give so much power to a cartoon.
That's a good point. If we start believing that The Simpsons can tell the future, what happens to our own responsibility and critical thinking, do we just become passive, waiting for the next prediction to happen?
That's not a good path to go down. We have to remember that The Simpsons, even though it's smart and funny, is still just a show. We shouldn't let it control our lives or what we believe.
So how do we balance our love for these predictions with being critical thinkers and making our own choices? Seems tricky.
It is,
Hmm.
but it's a balance we need to find. We can enjoy the mystery and fun of these predictions, but also remember that our choices shape our own future.
It's like that saying, we are the masters of our own destiny. But maybe with a little help from some yellow cartoon characters.
Exactly. It's about finding that middle ground between being amazed and being skeptical, between enjoying the unexpected and taking charge of our own lives.
So we're back, ready to go even deeper into Simpsons predictions. We've talked about the big ones, the ones everyone knows, but there's so many more hiding in all those episodes. It's like we've only seen the tip of the iceberg.
Right. And sometimes those less famous ones are the ones that really make you wonder. Like, remember that episode with the virtual reality food? That one always stuck with me.
Yeah, where Homer's trying to eat that virtual steak and it goes right through his hand. It seems so crazy back then. But now with VR and the metaverse, well, it doesn't seem so crazy anymore.
It shows how The Simpsons often picks up on new technologies. Even if they made them funny and exaggerated, they're not always right, but they often see something that's starting to happen in culture.
It's like they have a sixth sense or something, even if it's mixed with jokes and silliness. But then again, sometimes real life is pretty absurd too, right?
Totally. That's what makes The Simpsons so great. They mix humor and social commentary in a way that's both timeless and totally relevant to what's happening now.
Okay, so we've talked about predictions that seem to have come true, the ones that are still up for debate, and even some that were just lucky guesses. But now we need to talk about the one that's caused the most controversy.
You mean the one that seems to foreshadow 9/11? The episode with the magazine cover showing the Twin Towers and the number 9?
That's the one. It's a difficult topic, and I know some people might not even want to talk about it, but I think we need to address it head on with respect and critical thinking.
I agree. This episode has become a big deal for conspiracy theorists and people who believe The Simpsons can actually see the future. But like with all these predictions, we need to look at the context, what the writers meant, and what was happening in the world at the time.
So let's step back and look at the facts. The episode aired in '97, 4 years before 9/11. The scene that's causing all the fuss shows Lisa holding a magazine that says $9 with the Twin Towers behind it. Some people think this is a clear prediction, saying the $9 looks like 9/11.
I can see why people would make that connection, especially given how tragic 9/11 was. But just because things look similar doesn't mean they're connected.
Right. And the writer of that episode has said the $9 was just meant to be the price of a bus ticket to New York. The Twin Towers were there because they were famous landmarks.
And we also have to think about what the world was like in the late 90s. Terrorism was a concern, but not like it was after 9/11. The writers probably weren't thinking about foreshadowing something so terrible.
So are you saying it was just a coincidence? A random mix of images that took on a new meaning after the tragedy?
That seems like the most likely explanation. Plus, The Simpsons has always used visual jokes and puns, often putting multiple meanings into one image. In this case, the 9 and the Twin Towers might have just been a simple joke, nothing more.
It shows how events can change how we see things, even simple images or jokes.
It also shows how strong confirmation bias can be. If you already believe The Simpsons can predict the future, you're more likely to see connections that support that belief, even if they're not really there.
So how do we handle this? How do we balance our interest in these predictions with critical thinking and being responsible with how we interpret them?
It's about constantly questioning, looking at evidence, and considering different viewpoints. It's also about being careful not to spread misinformation or use tragic events for personal gain.
It's also important to remember that The Simpsons, even though it's often smart and makes you think, is still a comedy show. It's meant to entertain, to make us laugh, and sometimes to point out how absurd life can be. We shouldn't take it as fact or a source of predictions.
Exactly. We can enjoy the show and how relevant it is to our culture without thinking it has magical powers. It's about finding that sweet spot between being entertained and thinking critically, between enjoying the ride and staying grounded in reality.
This deep dive has been quite a journey. We've gone from debunking predictions to wondering if The Simpsons can actually change reality. My head is spinning.
I know, it's a lot to take in. But that's what makes this deep dive so cool. It's not about finding easy answers, but about opening our minds, challenging what we think we know, and embracing the mystery of it all.
Okay, I think we need a minute to process all this before we get to the final part of this deep dive. But stick around because we're going to explore the biggest question of all. What do these Simpsons predictions, real or not, tell us about ourselves?
That's the ultimate question, isn't it? And it's one that will make us look at ourselves, our culture, and even philosophy. Get ready, folks, because this ride's not over yet.
All right, we're back and ready to tackle the last part of our Simpsons journey. We've broken down the predictions, busted the myths, and even considered the possibility that The Simpsons might be bending reality. Now it's time to get philosophical.
Yeah, let's look inward and think about what these predictions, whether they're coincidences, satire, or something else, say about us as humans. What does our fascination with them tell us about what we hope for, what we're afraid of, and our need to understand a world that often feels out of control?
It's a big question, but it's important. The Simpsons isn't just a show, it's been a part of our culture for over 30 years, reflecting and shaping how we think.
Exactly. And if we see these predictions as a mirror, what do they show us? Do they show that we're deeply anxious about the future? That we want order and control in a world that's constantly changing?
Maybe. We live in a time of crazy technological changes, political ups and downs, and uncertainty about the environment. It's normal to feel uneasy and want to know what's coming next.
And maybe The Simpsons, with its way of tapping into what everyone's feeling, gives us some comfort. Like someone's paying attention, even if it's just a bunch of writers who were trying to be funny 20 years ago.
It's like they're holding up a warped mirror, showing us our anxieties in a way that's funny but also kind of creepy. We can laugh at it, but there's also some truth there.
That mix of humor and social commentary is what makes The Simpsons so powerful.
Yeah.
They can make us laugh at ourselves and our fears without being preachy.
And maybe that's why we love these predictions. They let us deal with our anxieties through humor and pop culture.
It's a way of coping together, a shared experience that lets us connect over our fears and laugh at how ridiculous it all is.
There's also a sense of wonder and fascination, right? The idea that maybe there's more to the universe than we realize, some force that connects us all, even to a cartoon family.
It's the appeal of the unknown, the possibility that there are things happening that we don't understand. And The Simpsons, with its seemingly prophetic powers, taps into our desire for meaning and connection.
It's like we're all looking for a sign, a peek into the future, some proof that we're not alone in this crazy universe.
And maybe The Simpsons, by showing our hopes and fears, gives us a little bit of hope, a feeling that even when things are uncertain, something out there gets us.
It's a comforting thought, isn't it, to know that even when the world feels random, there's that yellow family in Springfield who understands.
It reminds us that even when things are tough, even when the world feels like it's falling apart, there's still room for humor, connection, and being human.
Well said. So as we wrap up, what's the main takeaway? What have we learned about The Simpsons, about ourselves, and about reality?
I think the biggest lesson is that reality is always changing. How we see things shapes our experiences, and those perceptions are influenced by everything around us, including pop culture, social media, and our own biases.
The Simpsons, with its satire, social commentary, and absurdity, has become a part of that, a way we see the world without even realizing it.
It reminds us that we all have a hand in shaping reality. What we believe, what we expect, even our sense of humor, all play a role in creating the world we experience.
So maybe the question isn't whether The Simpsons can predict the future, but how it's shaping how we see the present.
That's a good way to put it. And it makes us think about the things that shape our worldview, question what we believe, and accept that the world is always changing.
Well said. Okay, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive, but before we go, I want to leave you with one last thought.
I'm listening. What's on your mind?
If The Simpsons can reflect our anxieties and desires, can it also inspire us to make a better future? Can its satire help us see the problems in our world and imagine something better?
That's a deep question. It makes you think that maybe The Simpsons, besides being entertaining, can actually help create positive change, push us toward a fairer world.
And maybe that's the ultimate prediction, a future where we've learned from our mistakes and created a world that's a bit more like the Springfield we wish for.
That's a prediction worth working towards. As we finish this deep dive, I encourage you to keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep finding those unexpected connections that make life so interesting. You never know what you might find.
Well said. Until next time, keep thinking and keep those Simpsons episodes ready. We'll see you back here soon for another deep dive into the world of ideas, culture, and everything in between. Okay, we're back for the final part of our Simpsons deep dive. We've dissected the predictions, debunked the myths, even thought about the Simpsons maybe bending reality. And now it's time to wrap it all up.
We've covered a lot, but the big question is still there. What does our obsession with these predictions, whether we buy them or not, say about us?
It's like we're looking for a message in a fortune cookie, but the cookie's a decades-old cartoon, and the fortunes are about real stuff. What's with that?
I think part of it is that The Simpsons is something we all share. You know, we grew up with it, we quote it, we use it to understand things. So when something happens that reminds us of an episode, it's like our brains go, aha.
It's like the Simpsons did it again.
Yeah.
But it's more than just a fun coincidence, right? There's got to be something deeper going on.
Absolutely. Think about it. The world's getting more complex and uncertain every day. Technology's going crazy. Politics is a mess. And the future feels, well, unpredictable. So finding these connections to a show we love is kind of like a way to make sense of it all.
It's like we're looking for a pattern in the randomness, a sign that someone's got it figured out. Even if that someone is just some writers who were trying to make us laugh 20 years ago.
And yet those jokes often touch on something real about what we're worried about and what we want. Like that episode with the virtual reality food.
Yeah.
It seemed so out there back then, but now everyone's talking about the metaverse and digital stuff.
It's like The Simpsons is some kind of early warning system for our collective brain, picking up on those subtle changes in how we see the world and ourselves. But here's the thing that really trips me out.
Yeah.
Is it just reflection, or is there some kind of back and forth happening?
Now you're getting into the good stuff. Could it be that by talking about these predictions all the time, sharing them online, debating them, we're actually helping them come true? It's a crazy thought, but not totally impossible.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. Are we saying The Simpsons is like a cultural Ouija board where our collective belief is shaping reality? Someone get Mulder and Scully on the phone?
Let's not go all paranormal just yet. But there's something to be said about believing in things, how what we expect can actually affect what happens. Maybe The Simpsons isn't so much about predicting the future as it is about planting ideas in our minds.
So those ideas become memes, discussions, articles like the ones we've been reading, and suddenly what was just a joke becomes a big deal, something everyone's talking about, and it changes how we see things.
It's a fascinating dance between art and life, between what someone meant to say and how we understand it. And it shows how we all play a part in making the future, not through magic, but through the stories we tell, what we believe, and what we do.
So what's the bottom line? Should we start prepping for the apocalypse based on Simpsons episodes, or is there a bigger point here?
I think the point is this. The Simpsons, whether it's satire, coincidence, or some weird cultural thing, reminds us that the future isn't set in stone. It's always changing, and we're all writing the story together.
It's like a call to action, you know? Be aware of the things that shape how you see the world, question what you think you know, and go out and create the future you want instead of just waiting for it to happen.
And who knows, maybe if we do that, we'll end up with a world that's a little funnier, a little nicer, and maybe even a little bit like the Springfield we all dream of.
That's a prediction I can get behind. So as we wrap up this deep dive, remember, keep questioning, keep laughing, and
Yeah.
keep your eyes open for those weird connections that make life so interesting. You never know what you might find.
And most importantly, don't let predictions control you. Go out there and make your own future, one that's full of surprises, challenges, and maybe even a few donuts along the way.
Well said. All right, that's all for this deep dive. Keep those brains buzzing, and we'll catch you next time for another adventure in the world of ideas and culture. See you then.